The All About Nothing podcast may have content and language that isn't appropriate for some. Listener discretion is advised. With Zach King, Trent Clark, and Barrett Gruber, this is the All About Nothing podcast. All right, welcome back to the All About Nothing podcast. I am Barrett Gruber, and this week I am joined by progressive political activist and spiritual thought leader, as well as author of 15 books, 4 of which have been on the New York Times #1 bestseller list, including A Return to Love, The Healing of America, and Healing the Soul of America, published by Simon & Schuster. You've seen her on CNN, MSNBC, ABC, and NBC News, as well as many others. She's frequently appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show, where she was known as Oprah's spiritual advisor, as well as appearances on many popular podcasts and featured in many published articles. And now she's campaigning for the Democratic nomination for the 2024 presidential election. Please welcome to the show, Miss Marianne Williamson. Miss Williamson, thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited to get to speak with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. You're currently in London, where we discussed before the show that it is quite late, and you have I guess you have more to come after this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you launched your campaign back on March 4th as a Democrat, and I imagine this question probably won't come as a big surprise because I've heard it asked before, and I want to give you the opportunity to explain to our listeners as well. Running for president in the same party against an incumbent who is already seeking a second term as Democrat, what made you decide that now is the right time to run for president?
My decision had nothing to do with Joe Biden. My decision has to do with the United States of America, what I feel needs to be said and what I feel needs to be done. And I don't think we have time to wait. You know, most progressive voices, certainly those, well, all of them really, actually, certainly those within the machinery, they're all waiting for 2028 because, the establishment elite has determined that it's Biden. I don't think we have time.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And it's not that I think that Biden is a bad president, but I don't think that the United States as a whole can continue down the same path controlled by capitalists, and I just feel like there's not going to be any progressive steps forward as long as we don't have executive representation that is going to do what's necessary in order to push the country forward, to make us more of a representation of the people and a government that is going to actually handle the issues that the people of America need. You recently spoke at the National Press Conference in Washington about your economic Bill of Rights titled A Vision for a Moral Economy. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that was you quoted Gandhi, and I've said it before on this podcast, but the idea of economics as a viable science is one of the greatest evils foisted in the human mind. And economics in the United States is often measured by stock numbers, or it's measured in unemployment numbers, or the Friday morning job numbers, that sort of thing. But as you've stated, this isn't an accurate measure of how we're all doing in the country. One of your campaign focuses is this economic Bill of Rights. In your words, can you tell us what the problem is and how the Williamson administration will address the problems with how this American economy isn't accounting for the hundreds of millions of people that aren't seeing this good economy?
Well, some people say it started in the 70s. Some people say it started with Ronald Reagan in the 80s. It's the idea of trickle-down economics, neoliberal economics theory, hypercapitalism. Really doesn't matter so much what you call it. It's the idea that short-term profits for huge corporate entities become your governing principle. They become your bottom line, as opposed to the safety and the health and the well-being of the American people and the planet on which we live. So there has been this massive transfer of wealth to the tune of about $50 trillion over the last 50 years into the hands of 1% of Americans. And Americans were sold this unbelievable bill of goods. Trickle-down economics, it was called. It was the idea that if the only responsibility of the company is the fiduciary responsibility to its stockholders, then that would be good, see,
Hmm.
because the CEOs and the stockholders would make a lot of money, but that was wonderful because they would create jobs. So all of that money would trickle down and lift all boats. Well, after 40 years, the jury is in. It not only did not lift all boats, it left millions and millions of people without even a life vest. Because if you only serve the stockholders, but then at the expense of all the other stakeholders, the workers, the environment, the community, the children, the animal, the safety, the environment, the whole thing, what you've got is a small group of people who get a lot of money and everybody else living in a state of survival on some level. And
Yeah.
that's basically what we have. We have an economy where 20% of Americans live pretty well within this 20%. But that 20% is surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. 70% of people in a recent CNBC report said that they live with constant economic stress. Now, it's interesting because everybody talks about the mental health crisis. The mental health crisis, it is absurd to talk about the mental health crisis without acknowledging the role that economic anxiety plays. During the 1970s, the average American worker could afford a home, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation,
Hmm.
could afford to for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted to, and could afford to send their children to college.
Yeah.
But the middle class has been completely decimated by this hyper capitalistic. And I think people need to make a distinction between capitalism and hyper capitalism. We don't have to have the argument about whether or not, some people say it's inherent in capitalism. I actually don't. I'm fine with a hybrid economy. I don't need that for my own conceptualization. But
Sure.
capitalism without any soul, without any moral center, violates even Adam Smith's precepts. Adam Smith, the main articulator of free market capitalism, said it cannot exist outside an ethical center. And that is what has happened.
Yeah.
And we are now ruled by this corporate aristocracy. And it's no different than the landed gentry that we repudiated in 1776. We don't have universal health insurance like every other advanced democracy because of the greed of the insurance companies. We
Right.
have people um, uh, rationing their insulin because of the greed of the pharmaceutical companies. We have toxins in our food, in our air,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
in our ground, in our water because of chemical companies and food companies and agricultural companies. We have guns on our streets in the most absurd ways because of gun manufacturers. We're ramping up fossil fuel extraction at the exact time we should be ramping it down because of the undue influence of big oil, and we have foreign policy and that is unduly influenced by and a gargantuan and bloated and price gouged military budget because of the undue influence of defense contractors. When is this going to stop? And what many of us now realize is that the status quo will not disrupt itself. That stuff that I just mentioned to you is baked into the cake.
Yeah.
That's why I'm running because it's going to have to be someone from outside that system who just comes in and does what she can to cut that cord.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that insurance is the greed of insurance, and that greed is so ingrained into the lobbyists that then are continuing to funnel money into the campaigns of candidates and things like that. And it's something that we can't break out of unless there's someone willing to come in and I've said before that I think one of the things that a president that could do to potentially break us of that is sign an executive. I know it'd get fought in the Supreme Court or make it all the way to the Supreme Court, but to just sign an executive order that says that Medicare does no longer need the mandate that you be 65 years and older, and then bam, you have a public option that I guarantee you 70 to 80% of the country would sign up for because of the benefits. I worked for Medicare for almost 14 years. I worked in a provider service department, and then I supported the support the I guess the departments that handled Medicare. But Medicare operates at between a less than 2% and less than 1% sometimes administration cost, where every dollar that I pay into the insurance that my family has, almost 50, I think it's between 50 and 70% of every dollar that goes into that insurance is paying for administrative costs. And then you have the agreements between hospitals and insurance of how much they're going to charge for it, how much is going to be covered of it, and then what's left over gets written off. And so now we have giant insurance companies that are getting these huge tax deductions on these made up numbers. It's frightening how much, or like how little the citizens, the people that are actually paying into these systems, have any knowledge of what exactly it is that's going on behind the scenes. Um, Sorry, go ahead.
Well, we have 1 in 4 Americans who live with medical debt.
Oh yeah,
We have an
we
$88 billion debt. We have 18 million Americans who cannot afford to pay for their prescriptions. People, as I said, rationing insulin. 68,000 people who die every year from lack of health care. And as I said before, every other advanced democracy has universal health care. So people are made to believe that the reason we don't have it is because the situation is so complicated. And that's not why we don't have it. We don't have it because the situation is corrupt. We do not need that middleman of the insurance companies.
I
And those
completely
lobbyists that you were talking about are highly paid lobbyists, and our legislators are visited by these lobbyists pretty much all day, every day. So
yeah,
it's not enough that they're just visited by us every 2 years in the voting booth or every 4 years. If this thing is going to change, it's going to take a political revolution, and we all have to be part of this. And we all have to not only vote in the primaries for a presidential candidate who would speak to it. Of course, Biden had said he'd speak to he'd support a public option. Now he never mentions it and said that he would veto a Medicare for all bill. And Obama had originally said that he was for universal health care, and then once he got in, he told congressional candidates he would not come campaign for them if they even mentioned the public option. But
wow,
clearly, these guys got in, and the insurance companies said you can go this far and no further.
yeah,
One thing you have to say about Bill Clinton, he did try on the universal health care. He and Hillary really did try on universal health care.
yeah. It's it. I am not only uncomfortable with insurance, healthcare insurance here in the United States, but I'm also uncomfortable with how healthcare is handled in general. Which is this is one of your campaign's big issues. Is am of the belief that healthcare isn't in the United States. Healthcare is basically a we attack we I guess we attack the symptoms. We if there's a problem, then there is a solution to it through the healthcare system. But there's nothing there's very little in our healthcare system that works to promote the I'm at a loss for words, but it's the idea that it's preventative healthcare.
Right.
You
So yeah, if somebody goes to my website at marianne2024.com, you'll see what's called the whole health plan.
right,
What you're referring to there, of course, is that we have more of a sickness care system than a health care system. We just wait till people get sick, and then we argue over how we're going to treat them. What we really need to be doing is asking, why do we have so much higher chronic illness than they do in other countries? And then that gets into our food policies, that gets into our chemical policies, it gets into our environmental policies. So my plan is, as you said, to proactively seek to create greater health in this country. We have neighborhoods that don't even have there's no access to fresh fruits or vegetables. A lot of times, particularly with children, childhood obesity, the issue is not what it appears to be. The child is actually malnourished. So the body is continuing to try to get more calories to compensate for the fact that there's not healthy food. So you're absolutely right. We have to change our thinking from the paradigm of just trying to treat sickness and much deeper trying to create a more healthy society. And there are
yeah.
many things you could do about that. And that's my whole health plan certainly does. And I hope people will look at it.
Well, I will say that you definitely appear to be living that idea of because you're 70 this year, is that right?
I am. I'm 70.
I if I had not searched that on the internet to see what your age was, I would not when because I don't know if you remember, but we met
Yeah.
at the Democratic convention. I took a picture with you at the
Wow.
Democratic convention in South Carolina here,
Oh, wow.
and I
Yes,
I
yes, and you asked if I would be on your show. That's what we
yeah
right. Oh, it's nice to see you again.
I would never have guessed that you were 70. It because I mean it's I turned 44 this year, so I feel like I look well into my 40s, and you don't have to say anything. I promise, it's okay. But
Well, I feel about you looking in your 40s the way I feel about, there's nothing wrong with being in your 40s. There's
sure,
nothing wrong with being 70. I mean, I think we have to so rethink um, age. I was saying to my daughter, because I'm in London right now where my daughter lives, and she just had a child, and that's why I'm here. And I was saying to her the other day, I said, women are allowed to get older more here.
interesting.
Middle aged and older women are not as invisible in Europe as they are in the United States. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Also, congratulations on the birth of your granddaughter.
Thank you.
Granddaughter, correct? I was
Daughter Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Mhm.
Oh goodness, I have a history with Elizabeths.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, Elizabeth is a fantastic name. I have several friends. Their names are Elizabeth, and family and friends that have named their daughters Elizabeth. It's a great name. But and one of the things I saw in you tweeted after your granddaughter was born was that um, the relief of being in a hospital and having medical care, that there's no you don't see anyone stressing about the idea of how is this going to get paid for with socialized medicine in the UK, which I I it it's not like doctors aren't being paid. It's not like hospitals aren't getting paid under the socialized Medicare medicine and healthcare system. It's it's the idea that this is this is one of the liberties I think that in the United States that is deserved. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is ultimately one of the founding statements or the cornerstone of what the United States was supposed to represent, and or what the United States was supposed to be for the people. Because when we came from where we came from in England and other parts of Europe with monarchies and such, the monarchies were not supportive of the people in history. The people were the support for the monarchy. Um, but under socialized healthcare and things like that, it's a complete role reversal where there's the recognition that in order to have a healthy population or a well maintained or populate just the population of the country being in good order, that the government has certain duties in order to take care of. And I feel like we pay plenty of taxes, and there is in my mind no reason why our government can't uphold their end of allowing people to have the pursuit of happiness, and health should be included in that. Life should be health should be included under life, like that. It just feels like by default that's where we should be. And in the United States, because of insurance companies and private hospitals and things like that, we just can't attain that until there's someone that breaks that pattern.
It's the social contract itself has been broken. Lincoln's term was that we would be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and that would not perish from the earth. This goes back to why am I running? Why am I running now? Why is there a sense of urgency? There's a sense of urgency to me because it's perishing right now. In all the ways that you and I have spoken, we've become a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. So at this point, the social contract, instead of it being that the government is the advocate for the people, which was the whole idea of the founding of this country. The government now, in too many cases, chops wood and carries water
Yeah,
for corporate oppressors, and they have become an oppressive element at this point. That's why it's called a corporatocracy. And in terms of those of us, for instance, running for the as a Democrat, I grew up at a time when the Democratic Party was the unequivocal advocate for the people, particularly the working people of the United States. Now, too often, there's this kind of double advocacy. Well, we advocate for the people, as long as it doesn't completely turn off our donors in the insurance industry, or our donors in the defense industry, or our donors in the pharmaceutical industries, or our donors in the oil industry. And as you said, somebody's got to break that chain. It will not break itself. The status quo will not disrupt itself. So at this point, the Republicans, in my mind, sort of represent this just nosedive for our democracy. But the Democratic establishment, the corporatist establishment, represents a kind of managed decline.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and it's I can say that in my political history, when I became more active after 2010, I guess, um, I supported Bernie Sanders. I canvassed for him here in South Carolina. I phone bank. I had 1,200 hours of phone banking and had many great conversations with people on the phones, talking Republicans and Democrats alike. Uh, and what always seemed to come across was that they most people don't want to pay more for the amount that we're getting. They don't want to pay more taxes.
People,
And yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
well, we have people pay so much now. So if you have 1 in 4 Americans who are living with medical debt, if I were to say to you, okay, you're going to pay $10 more in taxes, but $100 less in healthcare costs, you come out ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're underselling it because I have worked for large companies and I have worked for small companies. I've worked for insurance companies and I've worked for Medicare and I've worked for government entities. I think you're underselling it in the sense that uh, I worked for a small company where the what I was spending just on the insurance premium alone out of my paycheck was around $24,000 a year. It was a small company. I get it. We had less than 100 employees, but that $24,000 a year was, if there was a public option, I would absolutely be willing to pay, you know, whatever it took to have a a a medical program or a medical insurance program that actually provided the service. Because even now I have a much better insurance policy with or medical insurance through my benefits with where I work now, but I have to fight the insurance company on some things. They won't cover the if it's medication for my wife or for my daughters. I've had to go to the insurance company and say, look, this is ridiculous. This was covered when we were under a different insurance company. The diagnosis hasn't changed. The procedure code hasn't changed. Everything is identical. Why are you not covering it versus them? And it takes some fighting, and eventually I get my way, but that doesn't work out for everyone. I happen to be able to.
This is what's happening to people. It's just wearing people down.
Yeah,
People are just being worn down. Why should you have to fight? Why should you be having to fight for your medication for your children?
it's
You've
ridiculous.
got an insurance plan. And that's the thing. It's not just people who lack insurance, it's the underinsurance.
Yeah,
You have people who can, their insurance will cover for them to go to the doctor, but the insurance won't pay for the treatment that the doctor is suggesting. One doctor in Detroit told me, I used to tell people what I needed them to do, and they would say, what are the side effects? And now they say, how much would it cost?
that's
It's
scary.
outrageous. And how many people are rationing their insulin? And you're a man, you're a strong guy, you're a working guy. You know how to fight for your wife and fight for your children. Think how many people it would just be they just give up.
Yeah, no, and
They don't even know how to get on the computer and go through and who you have to call and what. It's just devastating, and it's so immoral, and it is so wrong. And you've got a president now who won't make it any better.
no, no,
So if we are going to stand for something better, I heard when I was in South Carolina at the convention, I heard Jim Clyburn say we need to tell everybody that we got insulin down to $35 for 65 years old and older. Donald Trump did that.
yeah, Yeah. Yeah. That there were sitting in that dinner, what dinner? Sitting in the appetizer, whatever. And not to slight the Democratic Party in South Carolina, I get it. It's not really an election year for them, and it's not. They were focused more on their leadership, but uh, I I I found it difficult to follow along with everything. And I don't dislike Jim Clyburn, but I had a difficult time following along with all of these things that were trophies for that he came up to make sure that everyone go out and say all of these things that Biden's done about the drug care, it was just it was a long list of different
Yeah, I
things.
remember it was the $35 for insulin for people over 65, and wait a minute, wait a minute. He said we cut child poverty in half. Okay,
Yeah,
now let's talk about this. They cut it in half for 6 months.
yeah, that was it.
So they had a child tax credit that cut it in half, and 6 months later, when it expired, they didn't permanentize it.
Right.
So we're supposed to go out and brag. First of all, if you can cut child poverty in half, you could eradicate child poverty.
Yep.
Okay. So that right there. And after 6 months, you don't permanentize it, but we're supposed to go brag about that and think that people are going to elect you. It's just,
There was an opportunity to absolutely make the child tax credit permanent,
absolutely.
and it it was available. The Democrats had control of the House and the Senate at the time. They could have done it. They could have pushed it through as a fiscal bill that would not have required the or the Senate Minority Leader to have stopped it from making it to the floor. It could have been held up in the Supreme Court as just because the Supreme Court would have likely, even under a conservative controlled Supreme Court, they would have likely held it up under the idea that this is a tax. Uh, and we didn't do it. And it like I said, it was difficult for me to sit there and listen to Jim Clyburn go through all of these things that Democrats are supposed to go out and say, look, this is what Biden's doing. This is what Biden's done. This is what he's going to do. I don't hear anything about the legalization of marijuana or removing marijuana from the Schedule One narcotics list.
And
I
that's
don't.
what it means we need to do. I would deschedule it immediately.
Yeah, and my listeners appreciate that.
We also let out of jail all the people who are in federal prison for marijuana. It's outrageous.
I am
And cut the record, expunge the record.
Yeah, I am absolutely in favor of that. If someone wasn't involved in a violent crime in with the in with a possession charge, then absolutely, I think that this is a ridiculous thing. I mean, the only reason that marijuana is on the Schedule One narcotics list now is because when Nixon was president, Cotton got into his pocket and said that anything having to do with hemp or the byproducts of hemp should be illegal because hemp was undercutting what cotton was doing, and then cotton left the country for the most part. So
Well, Nixon's whole thing about the drug war, he knew that we didn't have a drug problem in this country. He They kind of made that up for political purposes, and they all
yeah,
admitted later.
yeah.
There wasn't even a problem. There was, jazz musicians in Harlem used heroin. It really wasn't a problem.
People
Um,
get prescribed basically heroin through their doctors. It's just that it just happens to be pharmaceutically controlled.
well, that's the larger drug problem in this country is pharmaceutical drugs. Legal,
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies are the biggest drug pushers at this point. Predatory drug practices on the part of pharmaceutical companies.
So, and I know we're pressed on time as far as what's available, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and it's something I haven't heard you or many people actually discuss, so it could very likely be that I just missed it or such. Um, in the United States, and we did discuss military a little bit. It's military is an excruciatingly large part of the yearly budget, and I think, and my father would beat me if I didn't ask this question, but about 12 to 15% of the annual federal budget is spent on defense and non-defense military spending, and this accounts for $766 billion in 2022. And I'm not of the mindset that we shouldn't have a defense budget. We should. The Department of Defense, I think, is still the largest employer in the entire country. But our military actively defends and protects interests around the world, and those interests are in a lot of cases corporate interests. Corporations that through deductions and loopholes are able to reduce the cost of their protection through taxes. These corporations count on the defense of the United States, but are paying far less taxes than their share. Um, and when I pay my taxes, again, 12 to 15 cents of every dollar goes to the defense spending. 200 million tax paying Americans that are proud to support our military, but that military isn't always actively defending our freedom. The reality is they are actively defending the corporate interests of the United States. Um, I, I I have this mindset that the United States, as far as defense spending, that there should be a some sort of a program to if our military is defending freedom, that's great, but of a defense of corporate interests, uh, that there should be some sort of a tax code or potentially looked into having corporations not be able to deduct taxes that are specific to that sort of interest. And you may not have an answer for this, but I think I'd like to see some sort of move towards these larger companies, your Disneys, your not to pick on anybody, but General Electric, Boeing's, and things like that. That if somehow military and defense spending was separated into being able to, like, a corporation would have to cover their percentage, or we all paid the same percentage based on the value of what we have as far as property and things like that. And I General Electric, these huge companies in the United States that could potentially then, if they weren't allowed to make those deductions, that we would potentially see a strong military, but a military that was able to hold those interests accountable. Uh,
Well, the companies that are doing the most to transgress against our values when it comes to the military are Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. It's the defense contractors who are making out like bandits, literally making out like bandits. 60 Minutes recently did an expose on the unbelievable price gouging. And remember, the Pentagon isn't even audited. That's one of the first things I do as president, is demand that there be an audit of every cent that the Pentagon spends. So we have at least 20% that should be off. I believe, as you said, there needs to be a strong military in the United States. But the way I look at it, I look at the military like I look at a surgeon. If you need a surgery, of course, you want to make sure you have the best surgeon, but a reasonable person tries to avoid surgery if at all possible. Now, we have something like 800 military installations around the world in 80 countries, and many of them are exactly what you just said. They have nothing to do with protecting the genuine national security of the United States. They're doing much more to protect these corporate interests that you were talking about. And I would argue, and I would assume that you would too, that this actually weakens our national security because it increases resentment and anger of people around the world, as did the Iraq War, as did our staying in Afghanistan and being such a spectacular failure. So I think we need to, I think no phrase has been used to manipulate us more than quote unquote national security.
sure,
I think if we think of national security, we should think about the things you and I were talking about before, that your health is secure, your children's safety is secure, your job prospects are secure, your ability to have how to make enough money to live in a decent house, those things are secure. So this whole national security veil of illusion that's been dropped over our eyes. I think when people say they support the military, we want to support the men and women who literally are putting their lives on the line for our safety. But I think what even many of them are realizing now is how many of them have put their lives on the line, not for us, not for our freedom, not for our democracy, but for exactly what you just said. This is why people talk about the military industrial complex. And yeah, it's a once again, Democrat or Republican. Biden, we now have an $858 billion. One of the things that really upset me, it used to be that it was very accepted that no military person would be the head of be Secretary of Defense. Well, I think it was General Mattis that Trump brought in. So Biden just continued along that line. It was one of
Right.
the many things where we thought he would reverse course. And not only was Lloyd Austin a general, Lloyd Austin was a board member at Raytheon.
Yeah.
Now, which makes it even more egregious, all the price gouging that is going on. Because if he's the head of Secretary of Defense, and under his watch, there's all this price gouging. Well, wouldn't he be the one who would understand? So the whole thing is deeply corrupt, and it's just one more area where we just have to call it like it is. And I think in terms of it's interesting running for president because there are so many things that people would say, oh, don't be that honest. Don't be that real. Don't be that blunt. No one will ever vote for you. Well, I think our only chance for our democracy is for someone to be that real and
Yeah.
be direct and be that blunt. And then it's up to the people whether or not the people say, you know what, that's exactly the kind of person we need to put in there. I'll tell you one other thing. In a weird, ironic way, I think that's what many people thought they were doing by putting in Donald Trump.
Yeah. And
And I think we were talking about Bernie before. I think Bernie would have beaten Donald Trump in 2016 because both Bernie and Trump were saying to people, your rage is legitimate. The system is rigged against you. The populist fervor that spoke to was going to express itself
hmm
either with a progressive candidate or with an authoritarian one. And, the difference between Bernie and Trump was that Bernie meant it.
I agree.
He said those things because he meant it and he would have changed things as president. Trump said it because it was his way to close the deal.
Yeah.
But that anger is still there. The rage is still there and it's still legitimate. And I don't believe if the Democrats offer to the American people in 2024 a candidate who offers anything less than a fundamental economic reform, a fundamental economic U turn, then I think it's going to be very difficult to beat the Republicans in 2024.
I agree. I agree. I think one of my biggest fears, unless Trump skips out of the country when he's found to be potentially
It would be hard for him to hide. I don't know where he could hide. I think his face is pretty well known around the planet.
we don't have extradition from Saudi Arabia or Russia. That's where I that that's
Good point. Good point. Oh my goodness, it could get very dramatic, couldn't it?
that's my fear is that he'll see the writing on the wall. He'll jump in his big beautiful plane and take off and ultimately the worst part about that is I think that there's the potential you will still have that group that
Even if he was in Saudi Arabia or Russia, there would be people saying, well, after the way we treated him, that's where he belongs. And probably he'll be fundraising from there. God bless him.
oh
Well,
my goodness.
in all seriousness, it is very important that he have a fair trial,
Agreed.
that all Americans, no matter what our politics are very clear that number one, everyone is innocent until proven guilty, right? And that no one is above the law. So we need to all of us support um,
Absolutely,
fair
absolutely agree.
and a fair trial in that case.
I absolutely agree. And every time I have any sort of discussion with someone that is of the mindset that Trump did nothing wrong and that Biden is the Biden crime syndicate is what I hear over and over and over. And I say, look, I'm not going to sit here and say that Biden's been perfect. I'm not going to sit here and say that Biden hasn't committed a crime because I don't know.
You
If
know
he
what
if he
happened?
has if he has, then frankly, there should be an investigation. If you have enough evidence to support an investigation and that investigation has enough evidence to support an indictment, then do it. I
Well, we
absolutely
have
believe that's how it should go.
no, we have heard from the special counsel now. In the case of Trump, we haven't heard from the special counsel in the case of the president, but we might someday. Who knows?
It's entirely possible, and if there has been a crime committed and a jury finds that crime is if there is enough evidence for a jury to say that yeah they're guilty of this, then then prison time it is, or or however the Justice Department handles that. But you know, it I I don't know how to convince someone that I am not so aligned in one direction or the other that I can't see the whole picture. And I'd really like for them to be able to see the whole picture. And it's hard to convince people sometimes.
Well,
But
I think at this point, it's not even about convincing. It's about us standing as Americans, whether you're liberal or conservative, Democrat, Republican, no matter what we are, we need to be in support of the basic pillars of the U.S. justice system and hope for both men that justice is done. That's good for all of us.
agreed, completely agree. Miss Williamson, I am so thankful to have you here on the show. Is there anything that you want to discuss? Is that I've asked all the questions, but is there anything that you would like to make sure that we know? Your website is marianne2024.com.
Hmm.
Um, and I can speak personally that if you email their campaign, if you email Miss Williams' campaign, they will respond. If you ask questions, they will respond. The website is fantastic. It has and it's updated constantly with everywhere where you're speaking. I see your quotes on there. Um, the issues are well defined. It's your campaign is I think your campaign is doing everything that it needs to do to make sure to be out there. I think that it is unbelievably unfair that every time I see potential polls on potential candidates in the Democratic Party that your name is not listed.
Yeah.
That is absurd to me.
Well, it is absurd and it's undemocratic. And that is a big issue. And you are in South Carolina, and South Carolinians are the front line here because you
Yeah,
are now effectively the first primary state. And the president should debate his two opponents.
agreed.
The party should be staying in the background. Let the Democratic voters decide who is going to be the nominee, and after that, the party comes in. So it's very concerning to many of us that there is this effort on the part of the DNC um, to just shoehorn in the president. But I think we all need to make noise about that and say
Yeah,
that we want to see a debate. The majority of of Democratic voters, likely Democratic voters, have now said they want to see a debate. And I hope that the South Carolinian voters, certainly every voter there, recognizes the importance of their voice and of their vote. And I just appreciate being given the opportunity to say the things that I think are important and that I would do as president, which are a different agenda from the president. The president has made some good incremental changes, but we need a real economic U turn. People need universal health care. People need tuition free college and tech school. We need to cancel those college loans. We need free childcare. We need paid family leave. We need guaranteed sick pay, guaranteed living wage, guaranteed housing. Those are the things which are considered moderate policies in every other advanced democracy, and they should be considered moderate policies here. And that is what I think is the agenda that will beat the Republicans in 2024. And most importantly, I think it's the agenda that will begin to repair this country.
I completely agree. And you absolutely have an advocate in
Thank you.
myself and our podcast as far as
Thank you.
pushing the issue of allowing for a debate. Um, if the Democratic Party for some reason here in South Carolina doesn't think that a primary is necessary because they're just, like you said, going to shoehorn Joe Biden in, that is something that I will actively protest because it is, like you said, absolutely undemocratic. It is not a representation of the Democratic Party, and I'd like to point out that in the 2020 election, that Democrats were in support of the other two candidates that were running against President Trump at the time, and funneling money into their campaigns. So what's good for the goose should be good for the gander, and the fact that they are they're not that I'm a huge Robert Kennedy Jr. fan because I think vaccines are necessary in some cases, especially when it comes to the things of the viruses that we've managed to eliminate through vaccine. But it's he should be allowed to also communicate his communicate and debate on stage as well as you.
Absolutely.
So plus it makes for great television. And
And
I
people say it would make it harder for the president. I don't think so. First of all, if the president can't handle Bobby and me, how's he going to handle Trump or DeSantis? That's number
right,
one. It will make him a better candidate, I think, if in fact he's the one that the voters choose. But also, the Republicans had a whole lot of people on their stage in 2016, and they still won the presidency. So, this idea that if you have more candidates, you have a diminished chance of winning just isn't true. The other thing I want to say about that is they've created this narrative that it's never done. Well,
yeah,
when I was growing up, Eugene McCarthy and Bobby Kennedy Sr. Um, primaried Lyndon Johnson, and nobody thought it was strange. It's
right.
called democracy.
Yeah, that is how it works. There shouldn't just be a staple put in just because someone is the incumbent.
That's right.
Uh, because not that I dislike Joe Biden or anything like that. I think that there was potential, but at the same time, I also recognize Joe Biden was the best selection between Trump and Biden. But that Joe Biden is a statesman who has been in politics for most of his life. And Joe Biden is certainly susceptible and has been in the past of making decisions that were not in the best interest of the people that he represented in Delaware, but also not representative of the whole country as a whole. Being a senator, you're one of 50 people that represents the state of Delaware, but at the same time, you're only one of 50 people that represents the entire country. And there have been things in his past that I completely Clarence Thomas's Supreme
When
Court selection,
he
the what they did to Anita Hill was
horrified.
just despicable. And I don't know that Joe Biden's ever issued an apology or recognized that, but for me, that would go a long way for him just to say, you know what, I handled that poorly, and completely
Yeah,
apologize for what
much
happened.
more than that. There was the Iraq War and the
Sure.
cartel, all kinds of things. God bless him. Let's just thank him for having beaten the president in 2020 and wish him a delightful retirement. That would be nice.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. Well, Miss Williamson, again, thank you very
Thank
much for being
you.
on our
Thank
show.
you. I hope that I see you down in South Carolina.
Oh no, yeah. In fact, I'll make sure to get with Vincent and Duran and make
Thank
sure that we I would honestly I would love to come out and speak for you, or if you need
you.
somebody to introduce you, I'd be
Thank
more than
you.
happy.
Great.
Uh,
I would appreciate that. I'll take you up on that offer.
our podcast actually just got nominated for the best local podcast in Columbia, South Carolina. So that should carry some weight, maybe.
Congratulations. Okay. Good for you.
All right. So Marianne Williamson, candidate for the Democratic nomination here in the 2024 election. If just do us a favor, go visit the website. Even you have doubts, or if you have any questions, visit the website. You can contact the campaign. They will respond. They respond very quickly.
And if you like it, they can donate.
Yeah, absolutely. Donations are. We're going to put all the links in the show notes so that everyone knows where to go. I know it's an uphill battle, but you are, and I'm not just blowing smoke, but you are a fantastic speaker.
Thank you.
I have watched hours and hours and hours of you speaking from 2016, as well as I went back and did watch some Oprah shows. I was never a huge Oprah fan. I wasn't. I think my chromosomes sort of prohibited a lot of that. But just those were clearly some of the most popular episodes on Oprah, and I think that you're making the right arguments and the issues. When I first mentioned to the guys on the show that we were going to interview you, they didn't know a whole lot about you, and I said no, I didn't know a whole lot, so I had to go and look. But if you go look at your website, well, you have, but if you're listening and you go look at the website, a lot of the issues are the same issues and the stance on those issues that we talk about on this podcast all the time. And I think that those are the things that are going to progress the country in the right direction to become to move us in the right direction, to become the country that we want to be. We want to be the best country in the world. And I think that those are the things we need to do in order, and it's not a competition, but it is valid. We want to be in a position where we can help other countries, where we can help ourselves, but be that democratic representation in the world of how well it can work. So thank you
I agree
again
with you entirely.
very
And
much for being
thank
on with
you
us.
for having me on, and I will see you in South Carolina.
We'll try, yeah, absolutely, and try and get some rest. And
Thank you.
congratulations again on being a grandmother. I don't. I assume you're trying to get as much time as you can in, but
Oh, you better
I
believe it.
yeah, absolutely. I hope that I hope that you find time for rest as well. I know a campaign is relentless, but so congratulations,
Thank
absolutely,
you.
that's amazing. So
Thank you. God
again,
bless you. Everyone down.
Marianne Williamson, author and candidate for president of the United States. Thank you very much for being on the show,
Thank you.
and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Thank you. I look forward to it too.
Thank you.
The All About Nothing podcast is produced and engineered by me, Barrett Gruber. Thanks to Cake for our intro music, Sick of You. You can follow everything Cake the band at cakemusic.com. Thanks to Muff the producer for our outro music. You can follow Muff on Instagram at Muff the producer. Thanks to Trent Clark, aka DJ Lonzo. Join him weekly at the venue in Columbia, South Carolina for the Saturday All-Star Drag Brunch and Sundays at the Review Drag Brunch. You can also contact Trent for all your entertainment needs. Trent at theallaboutnothing.com and on Instagram, The Real DJ Lonzo. You can also phone him 803-262-7982. Thanks to Zach King. You can follow him on Instagram at KingZach07 and on Twitter at CarolinaKing21. I am Barrett Gruber. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Barrett Gruber or visit my linktree/Barrett Gruber. Want to support the show? Visit our page, theallaboutnothing.com, and become a member. There are several tiers available, including memberships that give you early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. Visit theallaboutnothing.com. To find links to our social media, merchandise, and past episodes, as well as other details, visit theallaboutnothing.com. If you'd like to be heard on the show, you can call and leave us a message. Dial 803-672-0533. If the time between these episodes is more than you can handle, check out our partner podcasts. Zach and I host What the Pod Was That with Carrie Simmons. Visit whatthepodwasthat.com for links and details. Ami takes a deep dive down the rabbit hole in episodes of Welcome to Wonderland. Available on all of your podcast platforms. As well, you should check out DJ Lonzo's Top 5. Available on all of the podcast listening platforms. Please subscribe and share the show. If you're on YouTube, please like and hit the notification bell. The All About Nothing podcast is a product of Barrett Gruber Entertainment and Media. Thank you for listening.